the other day we finally got a what I'd call a syllabus for what we'll be doing in the upcoming month or so concerning Angular training. And this first video I'm making is going to cover this section here, the Angular CLI Commands section. So we're going to create an Angular application. We're going to show how to create a module. We're going to show how to create a component. We're going to show how to create a service, directives, pipes, and we're going to show how to do lazy loading. Then we're going to show how to build the Angular application and how to run the Angular application with HTTP server. So see if we can get started here. So first of all, pop up VS Code. We're going to create a new Angular application. So we're going to open the terminal, open a new terminal, right? We're going to pop in ng new. It's going to ask us what we want to name this new project. And I will call it AngTut, which is short for Angular Tutorial. We will definitely add routing. We'll be sticking with CSS. I don't use these others. And now it's going to be installing the packages through npm. It's going to take a bit. Alright, so we've successfully created the new project. We've initialized the Git. Let me go ahead and open the folder. You're going to go to the root of your user profile. You're going to find the folder that it created. Right, so AngTut for us. So this is the user profile on my Windows operating system, right? And at the top level of that, you will find your projects. This is a project I had before. This is the project I have now, the one I just created, AngTut. I select that folder. Now it's open. So we have just created our project. So the next thing we're going to want to do is create a module. Just to show you. So first thing I'm going to do actually is get rid of the default HTML that shows up. I don't want that here. I'm going to get rid of everything and leave the routing in place. So I leave the router outlet here. Get rid of this dead line. Leave it like this. I just prefer when it's like this. You could leave it in one line if you want. So I'm going to leave the router outlet there, and then I'm going to show you how to make a module and a component. I'm actually going to show you how to make the component first, to be honest, because that makes more sense. It's more relevant to the order of how you should learn things. So when you want to do that, all you have to do is you pop open the terminal, and using the CLI, we're going to go ng generate component. That's how we get our first component. It's going to ask us what to call it. I will just call it C1. Right, so we have our folder for C1 now. We have our component. It's been made. It says C1 works. And that there is our first component. Now, a few changes that I will alert you of is that if you check the app module here, which is the root of the single page application that we're using, this is the main module, right? This represents the entirety of our app. And right here, whenever you make a new component, it has to be declared. As you can see here, when we use the CLI to make the component, it has auto declaration, so it imports on its own and then it adds it to the declarations. But you know, manually, you may have to do it manually sometimes. For example, let's say you're copying a component from another project to use it here. Yeah, you would go ahead, you would import the class from the path and then add the class to the declarations. So as you can see here, it refers to the path, C1 component right here, C1 folder, C1 component. Now when you see it not have an extension at the end, that's because it's referring to the TypeScript. It will detect that it's supposed to be TypeScript because, or a JavaScript file actually. So yeah, and as you can see, if you click on it, the name of the class is in fact C1 component. So let's get into a bit of how a component works. So as you can see, a component comes attached with a template or a template URL. So realistically, even though we do have this HTML file here, we don't have to have it, because what happens is that this component is loaded up and then it takes a reference from one of these from one of these properties you set. You can set an HTML through a template URL path that leads to that HTML, or you could directly make a template and use a string template to write the HTML yourself. You could just do that, and you could just go like this and write your HTML just like that, and it would work perfectly fine. It even has, wait, does this have auto completion? Give me a sec. It actually has it, which is insanely enough. So it has auto completion enabled in it. So you can go to your template, you could actually write a whole HTML component right here, but it just makes things easier when you use an actual path instead, because you isolate things to their particular files. It will be easier to manage rather than going through your component file in order to edit HTML. You just have your HTML file with all of your HTML there. Now there are of course some situations in which the template instead of the template URL makes life simpler, like you have a very small HTML or even a dynamically generated HTML. Yeah, in situations like that, it would work well in your favor. So now we'll move on to showing you what modules do. So what modules do is essentially it separates your single page application into sections, right? So you have components, right? Components are essentially pages, but they could be less than that. So what you do is that you create modules and you put components inside modules in order to separate them. So let's say you have a main set of pages. You go on the website, you have like the home page, you have an about page maybe, right? And you have those as the main components that you access. But let's say you have a login and a sign up page, right? They don't have anything to do with the other two, so you could group them together into a new module. So the thing about the new modules that you'd make is that all of them are children of the original app module, right? So all the modules you make after the app module, this root module, is a child module, and they contain either information that is useful or more components. So let me give you a good example here. So first of all, actually, I'm gonna add C1 here to the routing. So let me show you how to do that, right? So in the app routing module here, every module needs routing, right? So in the app routing module here, well, let me rephrase that. Every module that has component children needs routing, right? So this is the routing module for the root app module, and if you want to set up the routing to a particular component, one of the particular main components, we make an object here, we set the path, we leave that as blank so it's a default path, and we go ahead and type the component property, and we provide it with the class name of the component we'd like to refer to, which in this case is C1 component. And as you can see, it auto imports it for me. So you need the import, you import the class from the path, and then you use the class as the component. So this matches up this path to this component. So whenever we load up the program, it's going to access this route, and then it's going to show that route through the router outlet, because that's what the router outlet is for. It displays whatever the routing accesses, right? So whatever it locates and produces is shown here in the router outlet. Alright, so when you make a module now and you make components inside that module, you might be wondering how you're going to access those. So of course I'm going to show you that. So first things first, I'm going to show you how to make the module. So just like before, ng generate, but this time we're going to put module instead of component. So we're generating a module. We're going to ask what to name it. I'm just going to call it M1. So we've created a module. As you can see, it's at the same level as the components, but try not to let that confuse you. You open the folder and you see a single module. Now, what do we do from here? Let's say we want to add some more components, and we want them to be in this module, right? So we want them to be separate from the original module. We want them to be in this module. For example, just like the situation I explained earlier with the login and sign up page. So let's pretend like this is, for example, the authentication module, the login and sign up page. If we want to add components to it, first of all, we need to add it as a child to the main component, the main module, that is. So how we do that is we go to imports, and I'm going to trigger the auto import by starting typing the class name. So M1 module, boom, auto import. Right, so we import the module, and now it is registered as a child of the app module. Now that that's done, we can create a new component. So we'll call this one C2. This is our second component and the one that we're going to provide to our new module there. So here we go, that's set up and everything. Alright, and now we are going to declare it. So one thing I hope I mentioned this earlier, but whenever a new component is added, it needs to be declared. So right now we have a declaration of C2 component in the original module. We don't want it there. What we're going to actually do is place it in the new module we made, so we can remove that. We can remove the auto import here. What we're going to do is we're going to do all that in here. So we're going to declare that new component in here. Get that auto import done. Boom. So that's how we attach that new component to this module instead of the main one. Now we just want to set up routing. So we're going to have to set up routing for this module. Like I said, every module that contains components is going to need its own routing. And to make my life simpler, I'm just going to copy this one, right? I'm going to modify it so that it's applicable here. So get rid of this. I'm going to leave this here for a second, and instead of for root here, I'm going to actually have for child, because this is child routing. If we put for root, it would conflict with the original module here, which is the what should I say, the one in charge, right? This is the head module essentially. All of the others are children. So we established child routing. One moment. Oh, I showed the wrong one. Yeah, here we go. For root. This is the main routing. This is the one attached to the original app module. Ours is going to have for child. We're going to set up the C2 component here, and it's going to, I want it to auto import, so I'm just going to start typing it. Auto import. Save that, and let's see, I'll leave that path. No, I won't leave that path. Let's see. I'll just keep it C2 as a path. So we're going to go back to the routing here. So you might be wondering how we're going to set up the routing in this main file to access the routing in this submodule. What we're going to do is something called lazy loading. Lazy loading. Yeah. So what we do in this case is we set up the path that's going to access the nested routing, because that's what happens when we have submodules. We create nested routing. We're going to give it a path name. Let's just call this one route 2, I guess. That's fine. And right here we're going to have load children, and that is going to be a function pointing to M1 module. That is the syntax for it, and what that does is it loads up the M1 module when necessary. That is only when this route is accessed. So that's why it's called lazy loading, because you don't do it until you need it. So whenever this route 2 route is accessed, it's going to load up the children of the M1 module, right? And then it's going to access the routing here, and through C2 it will access C2 component. So you might be wondering, how we're gonna do that in the HTML. So the way you access the routing from HTML is, let's start from C1 here. What you use, let's say you had an anchor tag, normally it would be href, but in this case we're going to use what we call router link. And the router link, we want C1 to lead to C2, so we're going to access it through route 2. Let's make sure I remembered that right. Was it route 2? No, I wrote it wrong. So it's route underscore 2. And then through route underscore 2 we want it to access C2 through that path. So it's a nested route. So the next thing we're going to do is add this. So it's going to go to route 2 and then access C2. So that's what that routing will do. Oh, I forgot forgot something very important. I forgot to import the routing module to the module. So right here we need to go ahead and we need to get this app routing module. But I'm gonna change the name actually, and we're gonna change the class because that's not appropriate. I'm gonna change it to M1 routing module and then rename this to match that change. M1 routing module, boom, save. Alright, and good, the references are still fine. I'm gonna go over here and I'm gonna import M1 routing module. It does the auto import for me. It's now in the imports. Boom. Alright, so let's see. We have an error here in the terminal. What does it say? Appears in the ng module imports of app module but could not be resolved as an ng module class. Oh, okay. It compiled fine actually. I seem to have been seeing an old error, I suppose. Okay, so it went through. The routing module is attached to the M1 module, so now the routing is active. So let's see. Our troubles should be gone. Let's reload. Seem to be running into a separate issue now. What does it say? It failed. Yes, the JIT. Now, if you run into an error like that, what you need to do is Control C. You need to kill the current server, and then you need to do it again, because whenever you update, what did they say once again? Whenever you add new lazy loading into the project, you're going to need to restart the server, otherwise you'll get that error, because apparently some chunks don't load in properly unless you restart it. So I'm restarting it now. I did Control C to kill it, then I did an ng serve to get it started back up again. Alright, compiled successfully. Alright, it's back up and running. Alright, let's try component 2 again. And C2 works, there we go. So now we have access. You can see the link here. We've accessed C2 through the lazy loaded module, and it works just fine. Right? So okay, we've shown creating an Angular application, we've shown creating a module, we've spoken a bit about what modules are for, how to lazy load a module, created a component. So now I will create a service. So a service, as I believe I explained once before in class, is, what should I say? It is simply a block of code that you wish to be provided to many places within your application. May it be many modules or many components. Alright? And the way you would make one is instead of killing this, I can't use this terminal because this terminal is running the server. What I'm going to do is make a new terminal. Should be able to do it fine from here. What I'm going to do is create ng generate, right, service. It's going to ask me what to call it. A basic idea of it is fine. I always make a first service that I call global, that I just use to store information that everything would like to access, because of course that's why I call it global. So it created that service just now, and you see the files pop up here. The global service spec, which we don't touch, because, well, let me explain what these are for, by the way. The spec files are for what we call a Jasmine testing environment. It's used for, I believe, ng test, Not fully sure on how that stuff works, but it's about testing your integration, I believe. But basically, it's not something that I'm gonna touch on right now. So here we have our global service, and it is being provided in root, right? So what that means is that it's providing it from app.module, and every child of app.module will be able to access this global service. So were I to want to provide this service without this line of code, what I would have to do is go into app module, and then I would have to go into providers, and then I would have to provide the class global service from here, and it would do I would have to import it and provide the global service class in the providers. But we don't have to, because we have already automatically generated it to provide itself in the root. So that is the root of the application, so it's available to everything. So anything you put in here can be accessed by anything. So I'll just make a random variable here, num, right? And I will give it the type number and just leave it at that. Actually, no, I shouldn't. You should always initialize it with a value, or have the constructor initialized with a value. So if you have a property of a class, right, and you have it like this, and you want it to be set in the constructor, that's fine, because once you set it in the constructor, everything is fine, the error goes away, right? So num is currently 0. I'm actually just gonna set it to 10 so it's not 0. So we have num is now in global service, and global service is being provided to every component. So we can test that. Let's go to C2. We'll go into the component, and right here in the constructor we will ask it to provide that service. We will create a variable, and we will tell it that it should take its information from the global service. So it's going to use that class. And what happens when it's provided in root, as I said before, is there's a shared instance of that service. In other words, a shared instance of that block of code that is provided to everything that uses and accesses this global service class inside the app module, which is what everything is inside either way, right? So it's provided globally because it was provided in the root. So I can simply go ahead within this constructor, and I can actually access global.num. There you go. So global.num right there. Don't do anything with it because that's not necessary, but we could. It doesn't have to be private, because this is what we call an accessor. So it describes how a variable should be accessed. What private does is that it makes sure that it can only be accessed from inside the class. We could just make it public by having it default, right? And what that would allow you to do is to access global from the HTML directly, but usually that is not advised. So it should be private. So that's into some TypeScript stuff. I'll move on. So let's just assign this .num to global. Let's assign the value of global to this .num, right? This .num doesn't exist, however, so we're going to create it. Num number, boom, semicolon. So we've established that, and then now within the HTML here of this component, I am able to access that variable through binding. So make a new paragraph here. I'll just go ahead with the curly brace. So recompiling, and now it shows the number 10, which is what we stored in num. Alright, so the next thing we need to establish is directives. Yes, directives. So we have some directives that are already in place, the native ones. So that would be like ng if. That's one of them. That's a directive that exists on its own. There's ng for, and there's ng switch. So you can go ahead, you can Google those. I don't think I need to showcase those. What I'm going to show is how to create your own directive. right? So as usual, what we're gonna do is generate ng generate directive. We have a directive generating at the moment. It's gonna be a second. Alright, what should we name it? Let's just call it let's just call it big. And we're gonna use it to create large text. So here we have our big directive. Alright, we're gonna give it access in the constructor because it's passed information, right? And one of the first parameter it's passed is the element. So I'm gonna create a private element reference. It makes it a reference to the element. Hold up. Why didn't it auto import? That's weird. Normally it auto imports when element ref. There we go. That's what the problem was. I thought it auto imported, but it didn't. So yeah, you import directive and element ref from the Angular core. So now we have access to the element that is passed whenever you use this selector. So how do you use that selector? So our selector is at big, right? Let's say we want to apply it to a certain tag. So we go back to C2. Let's say we want to apply it here. We add at big. We add it as an attribute to the p tag. And let's go back to the directive. So what do we want to happen when we use that directive? Let's see. So we're going to access the native element from that element reference, and we're going to access the style, and then we're going to access the font size. We're going to change that font size to 50. Big, right? But it's a string, so 50 pixels. So that's what we're going to change it to. So whenever something has big on it, it's supposed to appear large, right? So what's this thing? Okay, so what we tried to add it to just now was C2 on the P for no, right? And it didn't work, right? Let's read it again, show you. It didn't work because, let's see, we have our native element changes set up, but we need to actually bring in that directive. So in C2, actually in the module, we're gonna add to the declarations. We're gonna add, oops, hold up. Yeah, you know, we're gonna add that big directive. We're gonna add that big directive to the declarations. Declared by more than one ng module. Alright, so there's a thing with being declared by more than one module. Oh yes, I applied it to M1 module. So instead of M1 module, let's apply it to the main module, which is the app module. And let's see how. Oh, here we go. It was auto imported when we created it into that module. But as you can see, it wasn't applying to the C2 component. Now, I haven't found a way to have it apply globally through all the children of the module as well as yet. But what I have done so far is to directly add it to that submodule. So instead of adding it here, go to M1 module and I add it to the declarations here. Big directive, auto import. See, the error goes away and our text should be very large now, as you can see. So there's currently an issue with sharing the directives. I have not solved that yet, but that's the general idea of how you create and use a directive. You generate the directive, you set it up how you want, you provide it with a selector, right? You tell it what to do with the element once it gets it, and you use that selector as an attribute on tags to apply these effects that you'd like to apply, right? And then you must declare it in the module that is above the HTML file or files that you wish to use that directive in. Now, some more stuff you can do with directive. You can also accept input from a directive. So the first input should always be named after the selector. And so let's say we we want it to accept a number, you know, how big. So number should define how big. We're going to initialize that as 0. And the way we utilize this first parameter of input is we put an equal sign, we put the quotes, and then we just go ahead and put whatever number we so desire. So let's say it's 10, but whenever you're accepting input, you need to identify now that it's actually incoming binding. So you put those square brackets around your directive whenever it's going to accept input, and now you can access input. So currently still size 50, but let's say we want it even bigger. Let's put 30 instead of 40. Let's put 40 instead of 10. Let's take a look at it again. When the constructor as the first function that is run within the class is ran, the @big variable has to be 0. So if we wanted to actually get the updated value and use it, what should we do? Mouse enter. So let's see if this works. Okay, yeah, it's working now. So we've got that event clicking. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to find one that works on initialization. But then again, realistically, you wouldn't need one, because you would simply set those attributes either in the CSS or something else. So yeah, I guess that makes sense. So we'll have this one just work like this. When you hover above it, when the mouse enters its container, it's going to increase its size. When the mouse exits its container, it's going to return to regular size. So we're going to use once the mouse leave. I'm going to actually rename this to unenter, and then give this one the name unexit. Alright, and on exit, what it's going to do is I'm going to set it to 40 pixels. Then it's the default size. Right, so let's test that out. Test out our directive. Alright, but also we're gonna set this default here in the constructor, so that as soon as this class is instantiated, it sets it to 40 pixels in the first place. There we go. So now it's a bit weird, but you can see it working. So that's the directive. Right, now the last thing, let's see if there's anything left. Pipes. No pipes. No pipes, we've seen pipes before. For example, so you use the pipe operator with a pipe, and let's say for example you want this to appear as a currency, right? You use the currency pipe, and if you check back, you'll see that this now appears as a currency. It appears as dollars and cents. So there are a good number of pipes. You can go ahead and Google them, and you can actually stack them as well. I mean, this one doesn't apply to numbers, but I'm just showing you. So you could actually stack pipes like this. So one after the other, you can keep piping and transforming the information more and more. So we leave this one at currency, right? To show what did I do? An extra R. So that's what pipes do, they transform data. And if you want to create your own pipe, you can probably guess it. ng generate pipe. Will it work? Yes, it will. So I don't know, let's call this pipe like whole number. Sure, yeah. Let's make a pipe, call it whole number. So we have a pipe. It essentially does nothing, but what you'll see here is that it has a transform function. It accepts a value which represents the variable that we pass to it, right? And it does something to it, then it returns something. So we know that the value whole num pipe should accept is number. We are not going to touch on this yet, these sections right here. right? This section right here, these arguments, we're not going to touch on that yet, but this also needs to have a type. So this needs to be the type of the value that it will accept. So in the case of this right here, num, this is the value that will be passed into the currency pipe. So if something is being, if this was whole num pipe, right? If this was whole num pipe, it would be passing num, so it would be accepting number types, and it would also be returning number types. Now it doesn't have to return a number type, because what it exists to do is to transform data, and that might involve changing the type of data that it was. So but this returns a number, and for this one essentially what we're going to do is whatever it gets is we're going to truncate. We're going to use math.truncate, and we're going to truncate whatever value we get and return it. And what truncate does is it returns a number without any of the decimal places. It doesn't round it up, it doesn't round it down, it just removes all the decimal places and gives you back the whole part of that number. So that's what truncating does. So whole num pipe exists to truncate numbers. If we want to use it, as you can see here, it's throwing an error when we try to use it in our C2 component. In order to use it, we're going to need to put it in module. Wait, module? Let's see. Let me try and remember here. The whole num pipe was added to here. We had an issue before with the directive, but let's see if it's fine if the whole num pipe is in both modules. So we're going to add the whole num pipe here, just like it is here in this module. We're going to add it to the declarations in this module. So under big directive, we'll get our whole num pipe, create auto. Alright, and again we have an issue. We have an issue with whole num pipe being called in multiple modules. So same issue again. I'm gonna have to remove it from the main module here until I figure out how exactly to solve that issue. So for now it will only be in M1. So the whole num pipe is provided. You can see that the error has now disappeared. I'm gonna change num. I'm gonna change num in the global service to a very large decimal. So you can see now it's 123. Alright. So right here it's going to produce it as a whole number. It's going to remove all the decimal places, so it will not appear as 123.456789. That won't happen. Let's see what happens. It appears as 123. Our directive is still intact. It still makes it large when we hover above it, right? Alright, so let's give an example of chaining here. Let's run it through the whole number chain and then run it through the currency pipe. Yeah, not chain. We're chaining it through the whole number pipe and then into the currency pipe. Now if we ran the currency pipe only, you know, it would have reduced it to 2 decimal places, but whole number, as we know, it removes all the decimal places. So what's going to happen now is that it's going to truncate it to a whole number and then produce it as a currency. So it's going to be whatever value with 0 cents behind it. So let's see, and there we go, 0 cents. So it was already truncated, that decimal data is already lost, and then it was converted into a currency. So now it appears as a whole number. So that's how you chain your pipes, and that's how you make a pipe, that's how you use a pipe, and this is how you declare a pipe. So definitely I'll be coming back with more information on having modules share declarations, but that will be it for now, because that is the Angular CLI. Oh wait, no, actually we have 2 more things to do to build the application and run it. I'm going to assume that everybody already installed HTTP server, but if you haven't, it was npm http server g for global, and then was that it? No. npm install g for global and then http server. So that's how you get it installed globally on your machine. So once you do that, right, you're going to have access to the HTTP server, which is necessary to run what you're going to produce in the distribution file here when you run build. So we run ng build, right? It's going to compile everything. So all these files that we have here, it's going to reduce them into a much more compact form. Right now the bundle is complete. It's right here in the distribution folder. Okay, so yeah, not 3 to 4, it's actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 files. 7. So it's definitely less than before though, as you can tell. So this file, this folder right here, this is the entirety of our application, but just compressed essentially. And the way that we're actually going to run that is with HTTP server. So in here, HTTP server requires a path to know where it needs to run this, what it needs to use to run the server, right? And it's going to require a path that is relative to the root of the current directory we're in. So we're going to have to go list and now it's available on 8080. Let's see, is this still up? Oops. Let's see if this is still up. Yeah, it's still up. So this localhost is still up because that's running on ngserve. Yeah, that's coverage for Angular CLI commands. I'll be making another video soon for TypeScript fundamentals, and then of course template binding. I'm going to be making videos for all of these. At least I hope to do so. So as long as I have the energy to do it, I will. So that's all for now. Thanks for listening. Hope this helped.